The midday sun beat down relentlessly on the fields of the red Ford pickup as she drove through the wrought iron gate of the Santa Elena ranch. Marisol Herrera felt her stomach churn as she looked at the imposing adobe and pink stone house that stood at the end of the dirt road. The purple bougainvilleas adorning the walls seemed to mock her with their vibrant colors, as if they knew what awaited her. "Mom, we can still pretend you're feeling sick," Paloma whispered from the back seat, her 16-year-old eyes reflecting the same anxiety her mother felt. Roberto Vasquez, in his starched white shirt and palm hat, didn't even turn to look at them. His dark hands clutched the steering wheel as he muttered under his breath, "We're here. Behave yourselves. Especially you, Marisol." Her husband's words fell like ice on Marisol's chest. They had been married for 20 years, and every time they visited the family ranch in Arandas, Jalisco, it was the same story. Her mother-in-law, Doña Carmen Vasquez, a 75-year-old woman with the temperament of a fighting bull, had summoned the whole family to celebrate family unity. But Marisol knew that was a lie. The truck stopped in front of the main entrance, where 5 other trucks were already parked, belonging to Roberto's brothers, sisters-in-law, and several cousins who had come from Guadalajara. The mariachi band playing in the courtyard filled the air with music, but to Marisol, it sounded like a funeral dirge. "Roberto, my son, I'm so glad you're here," Doña Carmen shouted from the terrace, waving an embroidered shawl. Her voice, hoarse from years of smoking, could be heard all the way to the parking lot. Marisol slowly got out of the truck, feeling the sky-blue dress cling to her back with nervousness. She had dressed up especially for the occasion: flat shoes, so she wouldn't look taller than Roberto, discreet makeup, and that dress he had given her on their 15th anniversary, when he still looked at her with love. Paloma took her hand as they walked along the volcanic stone path. The girl, tall and thin like her father, but with Marisol's expressive eyes, wore a simple floral dress. Her long braids swayed with each step, and Marisol noticed how her daughter looked at the house with the same distrust she felt. The main courtyard was a spectacle of traditional Mexico: long wooden tables under the shade of a leafy mango tree, equipal chairs scattered everywhere, and the aroma of carnitas and freshly made tortillas floating in the air. But what caught Marisol's attention most were the looks. Leticia, her older sister-in-law, was sitting at the main table next to Doña Carmen. She was a robust 48-year-old woman with platinum blonde dyed hair and long nails painted blood red. Her small eyes pierced Marisol like daggers, and a crooked smile appeared on her lips when she saw her arrive. "Look who decided to show up," she muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Roberto's cousins, burly men wearing leather hats and embroidered shirts, stopped talking and turned to look. Their wives, middle-aged women with flashy jewelry and fitted dresses, exchanged knowing glances. Even the children running between the tables stopped for a moment to look at the newcomer. Roberto had already disappeared to the men's table, where his older brother, Don Esteban, was offering him a cold Corona beer. It was as if Marisol and Paloma were invisible to him. "Marisol, what a miracle to see you here!" exclaimed Doña Carmen, approaching with slow but steady steps. The old woman wore a black dress with hand-embroidered flowers and orthopedic shoes. Her gray eyes, like Roberto's, sparkled with a mixture of falsehood and contempt. "I thought my son would come alone again, like last time at my grandson's christening." The comment was like a verbal slap in the face. Marisol remembered perfectly well why she hadn't gone to the christening. Roberto had told her it wasn't necessary for her to go, that it was a man's thing. Now it turned out that the whole family thought she had decided not to go on a whim. "Doña Carmen, you know I always try to accompany Roberto when possible," Marisol replied, in the sweetest voice she could muster, even though she felt like crying. "Oh yes, of course." Leticia got up from her chair with a glass of hibiscus tea in her hand, always with excuses. Work, the baby, not feeling well. The mariachi had stopped playing, as if they sensed the tension that was beginning to build. The waiters, young men from the village who had known the family for years, moved nervously between the tables, pretending to be busy with the dishes. Paloma moved closer to her mother, her fingers intertwining with Marisol's. The girl had grown up watching these scenes, these moments when her mother was the target of all the family's criticism, and she already knew that something bad was going to happen. "You'd better sit down. The food will be ready soon," said Doña Carmen, pointing to a small table away from the main group, as if they were second-class guests. Marisol felt the humiliation burning her cheeks, but she walked to the designated table. Paloma followed her silently, but her young eyes already showed the same contained rage her mother felt. From the main table, Letitia raised her glass of fresh water and, with a malicious smile that chilled the blood, shouted loud enough for the whole ranch to hear, a toast to the wives who know how to stay in their place and respect their husbands, and to those who don't. Silence fell like lead over the courtyard. Even the wind seemed to stop among the mango leaves. Roberto looked up from his table, his dark eyes sending a silent warning to Marisol. "Don't you dare answer. Don't make me look bad." But after 20 years of enduring humiliation, after years of being treated like a second-class citizen in her own marriage, Marisol felt something break inside her chest. Marisol felt the blood boiling in her veins, while all the eyes on the ranch stared at her like knives. Letitia's poisonous toast continued to echo in the hot air of Jalisco, and the silence had become so thick you could cut it with a machete. Paloma squeezed her mother's hand under the table, whispering urgently, "Mom, don't listen to her. You know how she is." But Marisol couldn't take it anymore. 20 years of swallowing humiliation. 20 years of being the scapegoat for that family. 20 years of Roberto allowing her to be treated like trash. She stood up slowly, her legs trembling not with fear, but with a rage she had been holding in for too long. "Excuse me, Leticia." Her voice came out clear and strong, cutting through the silence like a knife. "But I've always known my place. My place is beside my husband, supporting him through thick and thin. My place is raising my daughter with values and respect. And my place is definitely not putting up with the insinuations of someone who has nothing better to do than meddle in other people's marriages." A murmur of surprise ran through the tables. Doña Carmen dropped the napkin she was holding, and Letitia's eyes widened. They had never seen Marisol defend herself like that. "What did you say?" Letitia stood up too, her face reddening like a poblano chili pepper. "How dare you talk to me like that in my mother's house? I'm talking to you the way you talk to me." Marisol felt a strength she didn't know she had, with the difference that I don't need to humiliate anyone to feel important. The mariachi had completely put away their instruments. The waiters had taken refuge in the kitchen, and even the children had stopped playing. The only sound was the wind rustling the mango leaves, and Marisol's heart beating like a war drum. Roberto rose violently from his chair, beer spilling onto the wooden table. His dark face was red with shame and anger. He walked toward Marisol with long, determined strides, his cowboy boots echoing against the stones of the patio. "Marisol, what the hell is wrong with you?" His hoarse voice was heard throughout the ranch. "You're disrespecting my sister in my mother's house, Roberto." "She started it," Marisol shouted, feeling tears of rage begin to burn her eyes. "She always starts it, and you never defend me. Never. You have no right to answer back. You're my wife, and you have to respect my family." Roberto was now just a few feet away, his fists clenched and his eyes flashing. Doña Carmen had also stood up, banging her wooden cane on the floor. "Roberto, control your wife. This is totally disrespectful." Paloma instinctively got up and stood between her parents. "Dad, please calm down." Mom was just defending herself. "Don't get involved," Roberto yelled at his own daughter. "It's your fault your mother is so rebellious. You encourage her." Roberto's words were like a bucket of cold water for the whole family. Even Don Esteban, who always supported his younger brother, was left speechless. Yelling at Paloma like that was crossing a line he had never crossed before. "Roberto Vasquez." Marisol's voice broke with pain and fury. "Don't you dare talk to your daughter like that. She's not to blame for anything. My daughter is spoiled because of you. You've filled her head with strange ideas. You've turned her against me." Roberto was beside himself, gesturing with his hands, spitting as he shouted. His cousins tried to calm him down from a distance, but none of them dared to approach him. Letitia watched the scene with a satisfied smile, as if she had achieved exactly what she wanted. "I have never turned Paloma against you." Marisol had tears running down her cheeks, but her voice remained strong. All I have done is teach her to respect herself, something I should have learned a long time ago. Shut up. Roberto raised his index finger threateningly. You're not in charge here, I am. The entire courtyard watched the scene as if it were a live soap opera. The cousins' wives whispered among themselves. The children had hidden behind their mothers, and even the ranch dog had stopped barking. Paloma, with tears in her eyes, shouted in a trembling voice, "Enough, both of you. This can't go on." But Roberto had already completely lost control, his bloodshot eyes fixed on Marisol with a hatred she had never seen before. 20 years. 20 years I've put up with your temper. 20 years trying to make you a decent wife. And then, before the horrified gaze of his entire family, before the tearful eyes of his own daughter, before the eyes of everyone present at the Santa Elena ranch, Roberto raised his hand and slapped Marisol, which echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the Jalisco midday. The blow was so hard that Marisol staggered backward, bringing her hand to her cheek, which burned like fire. The taste of blood filled her mouth, and for a moment, the world went blurry. A deathly silence fell over the ranch. Not even the wind could be heard. The echo of the slap continued to reverberate in the air as if it had been a gunshot. Marisol remained standing, swaying slightly, her right hand covering her cheek, which burned as if she had touched a hot iron. A trickle of blood ran down the corner of her mouth, where Roberto's wedding ring had cut her lip. The Santa Elena ranch had become a museum of statues. No one moved, no one breathed. Time seemed to have stopped under the merciless Jalisco sun. Roberto stood there with his hand still raised, looking at his wife with a mixture of shock and satisfaction. His knuckles were white with tension, and his breathing was ragged as if he had run for miles. For the first time in 20 years of marriage, he had crossed that invisible line that separates shouting from physical violence. Doña Carmen was the first to react. She put her hand to her chest and whispered, "My God, Roberto." But her voice didn't sound horrified. It sounded satisfied, as if her son had finally done what she had always believed he should do, put that woman who dared to raise her voice in his house in her place. Letitia, from her place at the main table, had a smile she tried to hide behind her glass of hibiscus tea. Her eyes sparkled with a mixture of triumph and sadism. She had achieved what she wanted, to see Marisol humiliated in the most brutal way possible. Roberto's cousins exchanged uncomfortable glances. Don Esteban and the eldest brother, scratched his gray beard and looked away, as if he hadn't seen anything. The other men in the family drank their beers in silence, adopting that attitude that Mexican men know so well. You don't get involved in marital problems. The cousins' wives reacted differently. Some looked at Marisol with pity, others with contempt. Guadalupe, the youngest of the sisters-in-law, bit her lip nervously and looked away. Carmen Elena, married to Don Esteban, whispered something in her husband's ear with a look of disapproval, but it was Paloma who broke the deathly silence. The 16-year-old girl had been paralyzed for a few seconds, watching her father beat her mother in front of the whole family, her large, expressive eyes filled with tears that ran down her cheeks like waterfalls, and her slender body trembled with shock and rage. "Dad!" Her heart-wrenching cry cut through the air like a knife. "How could you do that?" Roberto turned to his daughter, his face still red with anger. "Paloma, don't get involved. This is between your mother and me." "No." Paloma wiped her tears with the back of her hand, but they kept falling. "No more. I'm not going to stay quiet and watch how you treat my mom." The girl's voice could be heard throughout the courtyard. The waiters peered out from the kitchen, and even the ranch workers in the stables had stopped what they were doing to listen. Marisol, her hand still on her cheek, looked at her daughter in terror. "Paloma, please calm down." "No, Mom, enough is enough." Paloma addressed her father directly, with a courage that none of the adults present had shown. "Dad, my mom doesn't deserve this. She works. She takes care of the house. She takes care of us. And you always treat her like she's your servant." Roberto took a step toward his daughter, pointing his index finger at her threateningly. "Paloma Vasquez, I'm warning you to shut up, and I'm warning you that enough is enough." The girl was no longer afraid. The adrenaline and pain of seeing her mother beaten gave her a strength she didn't know she had. Do you think we don't know anything? Do you think we're stupid? Something in Paloma's tone made Roberto stop short. A shadow of panic crossed his dark eyes. What are you talking about? His voice came out lower, more cautious. Marisol also looked at her daughter with confusion and concern. What did Paloma know that she didn't? The girl wiped her nose with the sleeve of her flowered dress and took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice trembled, but the words came out clear and devastating. We know about that woman, Rocio, the one from the clothing store in Guadalajara. What would you do in Paloma's place? Share your thoughts in the comments. The effect of those words was as if lightning had struck the center of the courtyard. Roberto turned white as a sheet. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His hands began to shake visibly. Doña Carmen dropped her cane, which clattered against the stones of the courtyard. Leticia choked on her hibiscus tea and began to cough violently. The cousins put their beers down on the tables with such a bang that it sounded like gunshots. Marisol felt like her world was falling apart. Her face, already pale from the shock, turned the color of wax. Her legs turned to jelly. Rocio, she whispered, looking alternately at her daughter and her husband. Which Rocio are you talking about, my daughter? Paloma turned to her mother with eyes full of pain and compassion. Mom, I'm so sorry. I didn't want you to find out this way. But Roberto finally found his voice. But it came out as a desperate quack. Paloma, shut up! You don't know what you're talking about. Those are lies. They're not lies, the girl shouted, turning to her father with a fury that froze the blood. I've seen you with her. I've seen you together. A murmur of shock ran through the gathered family. Whispers began to fly from table to table like angry bees. Paloma's words continued to float in the air like poisonous smoke. Roberto stood frozen with his mouth open like a fish out of water, beads of sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Despite being in the shade of the mango tree, Marisol felt the volcanic stone floor moving beneath her feet. Her eyes, still glassy from the tears of shock, locked onto her husband's, searching for a denial, an explanation, anything that would tell her that her daughter was wrong. Roberto's voice came out like a broken sigh. Tell me it's not true. Tell me my daughter is confused. But Roberto couldn't speak. His face had turned from white as paper to olive green, and his hands were shaking so badly that he had to grab the back of a chair to keep from falling. Doña Carmen was the first to regain her composure. She reached for her fallen cane and stood up with all the dignity she could muster. Paloma, child, you are very upset. You must have seen wrong. No, I didn't see wrong, Grandma. Paloma turned to the old woman with fiery eyes. I saw them last Thursday in the plaza in Tlaquepaque. He was hugging her, kissing her. Leticia, who had been coughing from the hibiscus tea, stood up so quickly that her chair tipped backward. Paloma, don't say things that could destroy a family. The family is already destroyed, the girl shouted, her braids dancing with every movement of her head. He destroyed it, not me. Don Esteban rose heavily from his seat and walked over to Roberto. His older brother, a 55-year-old man weathered by the sun and farm work, put a hand on Roberto's shoulder. Carnalito, is what the girl says true? Roberto looked up at his brother, and for the first time in his adult life, Esteban saw real fear in his younger brother's eyes. Esteban, I didn't, Roberto stammered, but the words stuck in his throat like thorns. Marisol slowly approached Paloma, her steps faltering, and her hand still covering her swollen cheek. Mija, tell me exactly what you saw. Everything. Don't hide anything from me. Paloma looked at her mother with a mixture of love and pain that broke her heart. The girl knew that what she was about to say would forever destroy the life of the woman she loved most in the world, but she could no longer keep the secret. Mom, her voice broke. On Thursday, when you went to Aunt Esperanza's house to help her with her sick grandson, Dad told me he had to go to Guadalajara for work. I went to my friend Daniela's house, but I forgot my sweater in Dad's truck. Roberto began to walk backwards as if he wanted to flee, but Don Esteban held him firmly by the arm. Go on, my daughter. Marisol's voice was broken, but firm. I went to look for him downtown. I found the truck parked in the Tlaquepaque Plaza, near the Elegancia boutique. As I approached, Paloma took a deep breath. I saw them inside the store. Dad was hugging a woman with long, blonde hair. They were kissing Mom, not like a kiss on the cheek, but like lovers' kiss. A muffled moan escaped Marisol's throat. She brought both hands to her chest as if trying to keep her heart from jumping out of her chest. Carmen Elena, Don Esteban's wife, got up from her seat and walked toward Marisol. "Oh, Marisol, I'm so sorry." But Leticia interrupted her with a venomous voice. "Maybe the girl is making it up to defend her mother. Children always defend their mothers." Paloma turned to her aunt with a fury that made several adults recoil. "I'm not making anything up, and I know more." She addressed Roberto directly, who looked as if he were about to faint. "I know you've been sending her money. I've seen the receipts in your wallet. 500 pesos every 15 days to Rocio Mendez." Roberto finally found his voice, but it came out as a desperate roar. "Enough, Paloma. Enough." He broke free from his brother's grip and walked toward his daughter with threatening steps. "You're a liar. A liar." But Paloma was no longer afraid. She stood in front of her father like a teenage warrior. "I'm not a liar. And I also know you have 2 cell phones. The one we know about, and another one you hide in the glove compartment of the truck." Marisol felt her strength leaving her. She collapsed into the nearest chair, her body shaking like a leaf in a storm. 20 years. 20 years, Roberto." Marisol's voice was barely a whisper, but in the silence of the ranch, it sounded like a scream. Tears ran down her face, mixing with the dried blood from her cut lip. Roberto looked around the patio at the faces of his family. Some looked at him with disappointment, others with disgust, others with pity, but they all looked at him as the man who had just been unmasked before his own family. Doña Carmen slowly approached her son, her cane tapping on the stones with each step. "Roberto Vasquez, is what your daughter says true?" Roberto looked up at his mother, the woman who had raised him with a firm hand, but who had always defended him above all else and before everyone else. He saw in her gray eyes the same question that was in the eyes of everyone present, and for the first time in his life, Roberto Vasquez had no answer. Roberto's silence fell over the Santa Elena ranch like a tombstone. His eyes, normally so confident and commanding, now wandered around the courtyard, avoiding any direct gaze. His hands, which minutes before had struck his wife, now hung at his sides like wet rags. Doña Carmen, the 75-year-old matriarch who had built her life defending her children above all else, felt something break inside her wrinkled chest. Her cane trembled in her right hand as she moved closer to Roberto. "My son, answer me. Is it true or not?" Roberto looked up at his mother, and for the first time since he was a child, Doña Carmen saw tears in her youngest son's eyes. They were not tears of regret, but of panic. The panic of a man who had just seen his world crumble in front of his entire family. "Mom, things are not as Paloma is painting them. Don't lie to me." Doña Carmen's voice sounded like a whip. "In 75 years of life, I have learned to recognize when I am being lied to. You have another woman, or you don't." Roberto's cousins had gathered in a semicircle. The atmosphere had become so tense that even the birds had stopped singing in the mango tree branches. Don Esteban, with his arms crossed over his chest and his face set in stone, waited for his younger brother's response. Guadalupe, the youngest of the cousins' wives, had discreetly approached Marisol and placed a hand on her shoulder. She was the first woman in the family to show open solidarity with the battered wife. Paloma was still standing next to her mother, but now her tears had stopped. In their place was an iron determination that made her look older than her 16 years. She had crossed the point of no return and was prepared to see it through to the end. "Dad," her voice was clear and firm, "Mom is asking you something, and so is Grandma. Answer them." Roberto looked at his daughter as if he were seeing her for the first time. This tall, slender girl, who had always been his princess, his obedient little girl, had now become his worst nightmare. In her young eyes there was no hatred, but a disappointment so deep that it hurt more than any blow. "Paloma, you don't understand. Adult things are complicated. Don't give me that." Paloma took a step forward. "I'm not a child. I'm 16 years old. I know exactly what I saw." Leticia, who had been watching the scene with a mixture of horror and morbid satisfaction, decided to intervene. "Roberto, if what your daughter says is true, then what are you going to do? How are you going to fix this?" Marisol raised her head for the first time since she had sat down. Her eyes, swollen from crying and surrounded by the purple mark that was already beginning to form on her cheek, fixed on Letitia with a fury that made the blood run cold. Fix. Her voice came out hoarse, but charged with an authority that no one had ever known her to have. Fix that, Letitia. A marriage where they beat me in front of my children. Years of betrayal. 20 years of lies. She stood up slowly, like a queen rising from her throne. Despite the blow, despite the tears, despite the humiliation, there was something about Marisol that radiated a devastating dignity. Roberto Vasquez said, addressing her husband directly, "I'm going to ask you this once, and I want you to answer me in front of your mother, in front of your brothers, in front of your daughter, and in front of God, who is watching us from above." The entire courtyard held its breath. "Do you have another woman?" Roberto opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. His eyes desperately searched for a way out, an excuse, a way to continue lying, but Marisol's gaze was like a laser beam piercing his soul. "Me? Us? Yes or no?" Marisol shouted with a force that surprised even herself. Roberto looked at his mother, who was watching him with eyes full of disappointment. He looked at his brother Esteban, who was shaking his head. He looked at Paloma, who had her fists clenched, waiting for an answer. He looked at his whole family gathered around, waiting for him to say something, anything. Finally, as if the words weighed 1,000 pounds, Roberto whispered, "Yes." If this truth hit hard, tap like so more people hear stories like this. The yes fell like a nuclear bomb on the ranch. Several women put their hands to their mouths. The men exchanged uncomfortable glances. Doña Carmen staggered and had to lean on her cane to keep from falling. But Marisol was not surprised. Something inside her already knew. Maybe for months, maybe for years. The late arrivals, the extended business trips, the mysterious phone calls, the changes in Roberto's behavior. It all made sense now. "Since when?" she asked in a devastatingly calm voice. Roberto swallowed, as if he were swallowing ground glass. 2 years. "Do you love her?" The question cut through the air like a knife. Even Letitia, who had been enjoying the drama, was left speechless by the coldness with which Marisol asked these questions. Roberto looked at his wife, the woman who had shared his bed for 20 years, who had raised his daughter, who had taken care of his home, who had endured the humiliations of his family for 2 decades, and for the first time in a long time, he really saw what he had done. "Marisol, I'll ask you a simple question, Roberto. Do you love her?" Roberto closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them, there was something different in them, as if he had made a decision he had been putting off for years. "Yes." Paloma let out a cry of pain, as if a dagger had been plunged into her heart. Doña Carmen put her hand to her chest and sank into the nearest chair. Several of those present whispered prayers under their breath, but Marisol nodded, as if she had been expecting exactly that answer. "It's okay," she said with a calmness that was frightening. "Thank you for being honest for the first time in 2 years." She walked over to Paloma and held out her hand. "Let's go, my dear." Paloma took her mother's hand without hesitation. "Where to, Mom?" "Home. To pack our things." Roberto took a step forward, his eyes filled with panic. "Marisol, wait. We can talk. We can work this out." Marisol turned to him one last time, and Roberto saw something in her eyes he had never seen before. "Freedom, Roberto. There's nothing left to work out. You just said it yourself. You love another woman. I'm leaving. You can't leave. You're my wife. Paloma is my daughter. Paloma is your daughter. Yes, but I'm no longer your wife. Your wife is Rocio." Roberto walked toward her with desperate steps. "Marisol, you can't take Paloma with you. You have no right." It was then that a deep, authoritative voice cut through the air like thunder. "Yes, she has the right." Everyone turned toward the entrance to the courtyard, where Don Aurelio Herrera had just appeared. Marisol's uncle, a tall, burly 68-year-old man with a gray mustache and a leather hat, had arrived quietly and listened to the entire conversation from the doorway. Don Aurelio walked slowly toward the center of the courtyard, his boots echoing authoritatively against the stones. He was known throughout the region as a fair but relentless man, someone who didn't beat around the bush. Roberto Vasquez said in a voice that brooked no argument, "You just confessed in front of your entire family that you beat your wife and that you have another woman. In my day, That was called being a coward and a scoundrel. Roberto instinctively backed away. Don Aurelio had a reputation that preceded his presence. Don Aurelio, you don't understand my marriage. I understand perfectly. Don Aurelio raised a hand to silence him. I understand that my niece has been an exemplary wife for 20 years. I understand that your daughter had to defend her mother because you don't defend her. And I understand that you just lost the best woman you will ever know in your life. He turned to Marisol and Paloma. Marisol, my dear, my truck is outside. I'll take you wherever you need to go. Marisol nodded gratefully. Thank you, Uncle. As they walked toward the exit, Roberto shouted desperately, Marisol, please think about it. We're family. Marisol stopped without turning around. Families take care of each other, Roberto. They don't hurt each other or betray each other. We're not a family anymore. She continued walking with Paloma by her side, and Don Aurelio protecting them from behind, while the entire Vasquez family stood in silence, watching the kingdom of lies that Roberto had built crumble forever. The sound of Don Aurelio's truck engine faded into the distance, taking Marisol and Paloma away with it forever. The Santa Elena ranch was plunged into a silence so thick you could cut it with a machete. 32 people had witnessed the total collapse of a marriage, and now none of them knew what to do with what they had just seen. Roberto stood in the middle of the courtyard like a scarecrow, staring at the gate where his family had disappeared. His white shirt was soaked with sweat, and his dark face had taken on a grayish tone that made him look 10 years older. Doña Carmen was the first to react. She slowly stood up, leaning on her cane, and walked toward her youngest son with steps that echoed like a death sentence against the volcanic stones. Roberto Vasquez. Her voice trembled, but not from weakness, rather from anger that had been contained for decades. In 85 years of life, I never thought I would see one of my children behave like an animal. Roberto looked up at his mother, desperately seeking the unconditional support he had always found in her. Mom, things aren't as simple as that. Puff. Doña Carmen's cane crashed into Roberto's shoulder with a force that no one thought the old woman still had. The blow was so strong that Roberto staggered to one side. Don't give me excuses. You hit your wife in front of your daughter, in front of the whole family, like an animal. Roberto's cousins had formed a circle around the scene, but now their faces showed something very different from the male solidarity they had shown before. Don Esteban, the older brother, approached with a look of utter disgust on his face. Roberto, how could you do that to Marisol? How could you hit a woman in front of her daughter? Esteban, you don't understand. She disrespected me. She started it. Carmen Elena, Esteban's wife, approached with eyes burning with indignation. She started it. Roberto Vasquez, you're a damn coward. Marisol was only defending herself from your sister's provocations. All eyes turned to Leticia, who until then had been enjoying the show from her seat at the main table. The platinum blonde woman stood up defensively. I didn't do anything. I just made a comment. A comment to humiliate her, shouted Guadalupe, the younger sister-in-law. Like you always do. Like you've been doing for years. Leticia looked around for support, but for the first time in a long time, she found none. It's not my fault that Roberto has marital problems. No. Doña Carmen's voice cut like a whip. It's Roberto's fault for being a scoundrel, but it's also your fault, Leticia, for being a poisonous viper. The old woman's cane now pointed at her daughter-in-law, and Leticia instinctively backed away. Doña Carmen, I have always defended this family. You have been poison in this family since the day you arrived. Doña Carmen was beside herself, always meddling where you're not wanted, always looking for trouble, always treating Marisol badly, because she's a better woman than you. Don Esteban, who had been silent for years in the face of his wife's poisonous comments, finally exploded. Leticia, my mother is right. For years you've been poisoning this family against Marisol, and I was a coward for not stopping you. Leticia stared at him wide-eyed, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Esteban, I'm your wife, and Marisol was my brother's wife. That gave Roberto the right to treat her like trash. That gives me the right to let you constantly humiliate her. Cousin Ruben, a burly 45-year-old man who had always been quiet, approached Roberto with a look of disgust on his face. Carnalito, for 2 years, 2 years you've been cheating on Marisol. Roberto looked at him with pleading eyes. Ruben, you know how things are. Sometimes a man just can't help himself. Ruben raised his hand to stop him. Don't give me that macho bullshit. A real man doesn't cheat on his wife. A real man doesn't hit his wife. Salvador, another cousin, spat contemptuously on the ground. Roberto, my dad taught me that women are to be respected, that wives are to be cared for. This is how you repaid Marisol for 20 years of marriage, by cheating on her and hitting her. The ranch workers who had been listening from afar began to approach. They were humble men, farm hands and cowboys who had known the family for decades. Don Checo, the 60-year-old foreman, took off his hat and addressed Roberto directly. Boss Roberto, I knew your father. May he rest in peace. Don Rodolfo would never have laid a hand on Doña Carmen. Never. What you did today would make your father turn in his grave. The old foreman's words were like stabs to Roberto. His father had been a respected man throughout the region, known for his honor and his fair treatment of women. Doña Carmen moved closer to Roberto, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with infinite sadness. Your father and I were married for 52 years before God took him. 52 years. Do you know how many times he laid a hand on me? Never. Do you know how many times he was unfaithful to me? Never. Because he was a real man, not a coward like you. Roberto felt his knees buckle. He slumped into one of the chairs with his head in his hands. Mom, things got complicated. Rocio understands me in a way that... Shut up! Doña Carmen's scream scared even the birds away. I don't want to hear that woman's name in my house. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear anything. She addressed the rest of the family with absolute authority. Esteban, Ruben, Salvador, Carmen, Elena, Guadalupe, all of you. This is my house, and certain rules are going to be respected here. Roberto has dishonored the Vasquez name. He has hit his wife and betrayed her with another woman. Until he fixes this, until he behaves like the man he should be, he is not welcome in this house. Roberto raised his head in total shock. Mom, you're kicking me out of the house. I'm telling you to reflect on what you've done, to think about the damage you've caused, and until you come to Marisol on your knees to ask for her forgiveness, I don't want to see you around here. Don Esteban nodded in approval. Mom is right, Roberto. What you did today is unforgivable. Carmen Elena, who had always been diplomatic, now had tears in her eyes. Roberto, Marisol was always good to me, always respectful. And you treated her like she was your enemy. Leticia, seeing that she had completely lost the support of the family, tried to defend herself one last time. This is all very exaggerated. Marriages have problems. It's no big deal. Guadalupe turned to her with a fury that surprised everyone. It's no big deal, Leticia. We just saw a man hit his wife in front of his daughter. What part of that do you think is normal? Ruben approached Leticia with a look of contempt on his face. Leticia, you were the one who started all this with your poisonous comment. You caused Roberto to lose control. I didn't force Roberto to hit anyone. No, but you have been poisoning this family against Marisol for years, Salvador shouted. Always with your comments. Always making her feel bad. Don Esteban looked at his wife with a disappointment that pierced her like a sword. Leticia, I think you and I need to have a very serious talk when we get home. Esteban and Leticia's marriage, which had lasted 25 years, had just been dangerously shaken. Roberto stood up slowly, seeing how his entire family had turned against him. His kingdom of male privileges, where he had always had the unconditional support of his mother and brothers, had just completely collapsed. It's okay, he said in a broken voice. I'm leaving, but this isn't going to stay this way. Marisol is my wife and Paloma is my daughter. I have rights. Don Checo, the foreman, approached him with a serious face. Patron Roberto, with all due respect, rights are earned with honor, and you lost your honor today. Roberto walked to his truck, while his entire family watched him in silence. For the first time in his life, he was leaving the family ranch as an outcast, as an exile. When the sound of his engine disappeared in the distance, Doña Carmen slumped into her chair with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world. My God, where did I go wrong in raising him? Don Esteban approached his mother and put a hand on her shoulder. Mom, You didn't do anything wrong. Roberto made his own decisions. Bad decisions. Carmen Elena sat down next to Doña Carmen. Ma'am, what you did today was the right thing. Marisol deserved someone to defend her. Guadalupe nodded. I wish we had done something sooner. I wish we hadn't let things get this far. The Santa Elena Ranch, which had started the day as a family gathering, ended up being the scene where a family had to confront its darkest demons. And in the silence that followed, everyone wondered the same thing. Would it be possible to repair the damage that had been done that day? The small adobe house on the outskirts of Tlaquepaque seemed like a refuge after the storm. Don Aurelio had taken Marisol and Paloma directly to the home of his sister Rosa, the aunt who had raised Marisol after her parents died in an accident when she was 15. It was a modest house, but full of love, with pots of geraniums in the windows and the permanent aroma of coffee, pottery, and cinnamon. Aunt Rosa, a 70-year-old woman with completely white hair, tied back in a bun, and hands weathered by years of work, welcomed her niece with a hug that lasted several minutes. She asked no questions, sought no explanations, simply held them as Marisol completely broke down in her arms. My dear, you're here now. You're safe, whispered the old woman, stroking Marisol's black hair as she had when she was a teenager. Paloma had sat down on the living room sofa, still in shock from everything that had happened. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched her mother cry inconsolably for the first time in her memory. For 16 years, she had seen Marisol be strong, endure, smile despite everything, and seeing her broken like this broke her heart. Don Aurelio took off his hat and sat down at the kitchen table, from where he could keep an eye on the front door. In his years, he had seen many things in life, but what he had witnessed at the Santa Elena Ranch had filled him with a cold rage that still boiled in his veins. Rosa, he said in a deep voice. Roberto had laid his hands on Marisol in front of her entire family, in front of his own daughter. Aunt Rosa moved away from Marisol to get a better look at her. The purple mark on her niece's cheek had grown, and the cut on her lip had left a crust of dried blood. Her small, kind eyes filled with tears of rage. That bastard. That damn bastard. And that's not all, Don Aurelio continued. It turns out he's had another woman for 2 years. A woman named Rocio from Guadalajara. Aunt Rosa put her hands to her chest and sat down heavily in her wicker rocking chair. Good heavens, Marisol. My daughter, how could you put up with it for so long? Marisol wiped her tears with the back of her hand, revealing the red mark on her cheek. I didn't know, Auntie. I didn't know about the other woman. But the beatings, well, he never hit me like that. But he did push me when he got angry. He did yell at me. He did make me feel like everything was my fault. Paloma raised her head from the sofa. Mom, I did know he treated you badly. I always knew. But I thought that's how marriages were. Paloma's words fell like stones on Marisol's heart. Her daughter had grown up thinking it was normal for husbands to treat their wives badly. She had normalized violence because it was the only thing she had seen at home. No, honey, Marisol said in a broken voice. Marriages aren't like that. Marriages are about respect, love, and support. What you saw in our home was not love. Aunt Rosa got up and went to the kitchen to put water on for coffee. Her movements were slow but sure, like someone who knows that crises are best faced with busy hands. Marisol, do you have any money? Do you have any documents? Do you have anything? Marisol shook her head. I have my voter registration card in my bag, and about 200 pesos I had for gas. But everything else, the house, the bank accounts, everything is in Roberto's name. Don Aurelio banged his fist on the table. That bastard always had you under his thumb financially. He never let you have your own money, did he? He said it was his duty to support me, that I didn't need to work because he gave me everything I needed. What you needed was independence, Aunt Rosa murmured from the kitchen. A husband who respects you helps you grow. He doesn't keep you locked up like a bird in a cage. Paloma approached her mother and took her hands. Mom, what are we going to do now? It was the question Marisol had been avoiding since they left the ranch. What was a 42-year-old woman going to do, without a job, without money, without a home, with a teenage daughter to support? I don't know, my daughter, but we're not going back to your dad. That much I know. Don Aurelio got up from the table. Marisol, I have a proposal. My friend Joaquin has a clothing store in downtown Tlaquepaque. He needs someone who knows numbers and knows how to deal with people. I'll talk to him to see if he can give you a job. Uncle, I don't have any sales experience. You have experience being honest, being hardworking, being smart. That's more important than experience. Aunt Rosa returned from the kitchen with a steaming cup of coffee for Marisol. And while you're looking for work, you two can stay here. This house belongs to both of you. It always has. Marisol felt something stir in her chest. For the first time in 20 years, she was making decisions about her own life. For the first time in 2 decades, she didn't have to ask permission to do something. Auntie, we don't know for how long as necessary. Marisol, when your parents died, you were 15 and alone in the world. You stayed with me until you got married. Now you're 42 and alone again. Well, you're staying with me until you're strong again. Paloma wiped away the tears she had been holding back. And me? What about school and my friends? It was a valid concern. Paloma had grown up in Arandas. Her whole life was there. Her friends, her school, her routine. Don Aurelio approached his grandniece. Paloma, there are good schools here in Tlaquepaque too, and you're almost done with high school. You can make the change for your last year. But what about Dad? Won't he try to take us back? Marisol looked at her daughter with a determination that surprised even herself. Your dad is going to have to get used to the fact that we are no longer his property. We are going to see a lawyer. Don't miss how this unfolds. Subscribe to follow the rest of the story. We are going to get a legal separation and make sure that he can see you when you want to see him, but that he can't force us to go back. Don Aurelio smiled for the first time since they had arrived. That's the way to talk, my daughter. My friend Gonzalo is a lawyer. He's retired, but he still takes on special cases. I'll talk to him tomorrow. Aunt Rosa sat down next to Marisol and took her free hand. My daughter, what you did today was the bravest thing I've ever seen. After 20 years of putting up with it, you stood up and said, "No more." Not everyone can do that. I don't feel brave, Auntie. I feel scared. Courage isn't about not being afraid, my daughter. Courage is doing the right thing, even when you're afraid. Paloma curled up on the couch next to her mother. Mom, do you think Dad can change? Do you think he can leave that woman and go back to the way he was before? Marisol stroked her daughter's long hair. My daughter, your dad was never any different. I realize today that for 20 years I've been waiting for him to become the man I thought he could be. But people don't change unless they want to change. And your dad is happy being who he is. But do you still love him? It was the hardest question of all. Marisol looked out the window at the Jalisco sunset, its orange and pink colors painting the sky. For 20 years she had loved Roberto Vasquez. He had been the love of her youth, the father of her daughter, the center of her world. I loved him very much, my daughter, but the man I loved was not the real man. He was the man I hoped he would be. Today, I realized that. Don Aurelio, who had been listening quietly, approached them. Marisol, tomorrow you will wake up, and it will be the first day of the rest of your life. It will be difficult, but you will be free, and freedom is worth any sacrifice. That night, while Paloma slept in the room that had been Marisol's as a teenager, and while Aunt Rosa snored softly in her bedroom, Marisol lay awake in the living room, looking at the stars through the window. For the first time in 20 years, she didn't have to worry about coming home late. She didn't have to worry about having dinner ready on time. She didn't have to worry about walking quietly so as not to wake up a bad-tempered husband. She was afraid, yes. She was uncertain, yes. But she also had something she had lost a long time ago. Hope. She gently touched her swollen cheek and made a promise to herself. She would never again let anyone treat her as less than she was worth. She would never again be invisible in her own life. The home phone rang 3 times that night. Aunt Rosa had disconnected the cord after the second call. Roberto was desperate, but Marisol was no longer willing to listen to him. 3 months had passed since that fateful Sunday at the Santa Elena Ranch. Autumn had arrived in Tlaquepaque with its cool mornings and golden afternoons, and Marisol's life had changed in ways she had never dared to imagine. Compadre Joaquin's Elegancia Femenina store had become her second home. Marisol had discovered that she had a natural talent for sales and for making women feel beautiful and confident. Her sales were the highest in the store, and Joaquin, a good-natured 60-year-old man, had already offered to make her a junior partner in the business. "Marisol, you have a gift," he had told her that very morning. "Women trust you. They see in you someone who understands them." Paloma had adapted surprisingly well to her new school in Tlaquepaque. Her grades had improved markedly, and she had made new friends who admired her for her courage in defending her mother. The girl had grown emotionally in ways that only crises can bring about, and now she talked about studying law to defend women like my mom. Aunt Rosa had blossomed with the company. The house that had been silent for years was now filled with laughter, conversation, and the music Paloma played while doing her homework. The three women had created a small family that functioned with love, respect, and mutual support. But Roberto had not given up. For the first 2 months, he had called tirelessly and shown up at the store. He had sent messages through mutual relatives. His strategies had ranged from desperate pleas to veiled threats to promises of change that Marisol no longer believed. Gonzalo, Don Aurelio's retired compadre, had turned out to be a wise and experienced man who had handled the case with surgical precision. The divorce papers were already in process, and Roberto had been ordered by the judge to pay child support for Paloma and to stay at least 200 meters away from Marisol. But that November afternoon, as Marisol closed the store after a particularly good day of sales, Roberto was waiting for her in the main square of Tlaquepaque, sitting on a bench under an Indian laurel tree with a bouquet of red roses in his hands. Marisol saw him from afar and felt her stomach knot up. It wasn't exactly fear, but rather the feeling of seeing a ghost from her past. Roberto looked different, thinner, with deep circles under his eyes, and his clothes were not as meticulously cared for as before. He approached slowly, unhurriedly, with the confidence of someone who no longer has anything to fear. "Hello, Marisol." His voice sounded hoarse, as if he had cried a lot or shouted too much. "Roberto, you shouldn't be here. There's a restraining order. I just want to talk to you for 5 minutes. 5 minutes and I'll leave." Marisol looked at him closely. The man who had been her husband for 20 years seemed to have aged 5 years in 3 months. His eyes, which once sparkled with arrogance, now had a dullness that spoke of sleepless nights and purposeless days. "All right, 5 minutes." Roberto stood up and held out the roses to her. Marisol didn't take them. "Marisol, I'm done with Rocio." The words fell into the cool afternoon air like stones into a pond. Marisol felt nothing, absolutely nothing, and Roberto blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. "I thought you'd like to know. I thought maybe we could try again." Marisol leaned against the laurel tree trunk and smiled sadly. "Roberto, do you really think Rocio was the problem? She confused me, made me do things I would never have done, like hitting myself." Roberto looked down. "That was it. I was very angry. You disrespected me in front of my family." "Roberto," Marisol interrupted him in a calm voice. 3 months ago, I would have believed that excuse. I would have thought that yes, I had done something wrong, that I had provoked you. But now I know the truth." "What truth?" "That you hit me because you could. Because for 20 years you taught me that it was normal. Because you never learned to control your anger. And because you believed I was your property." Roberto looked up in despair. "You're not my property. You're my wife, the mother of my daughter. I was your wife. I'm not anymore. The divorce papers aren't signed yet, but my heart divorced you 3 months ago, Roberto. The day you hit me in front of Paloma." Roberto took a step closer, and Marisol noticed that he didn't back away. 3 months ago, he would have automatically taken 2 steps back. Now he stood his ground. "Marisol, I love you. I've always loved you. No, Roberto. You loved the idea of having me. You loved having a woman who took care of your house, raised your daughter, never questioned you. But you never loved me, because if you had loved me, you would have listened to me. You would have respected me. You would have defended me when your family humiliated me." Roberto dropped the roses on the ground. "What about Paloma? Don't you think about her? A child needs her father." For the first time in the conversation, Marisol felt a flash of anger. "Of course I think about Paloma. I think about her every day, and that's precisely why I'm not going back to you. I don't understand. Roberto, do you know what Paloma told me last week? She told me that for the first time in her life, she's not afraid to come home. that for the first time she can study in peace without hearing shouting, that for the first time she saw her mother smile genuinely. Roberto brought his hands to his face. I never yelled at Paloma. No, but she lived in a house where there was constant yelling, where there was tension all the time, where her mother walked on tiptoes so as not to disturb her father. That can change. I can change. Marisol looked at him with genuine compassion. Roberto, I hope you can change. I really hope so. But not for me. For you and for the women who come after me. There won't be any women after you. There will be. And when there are, I hope you treat them better than you treated me. Roberto sat down heavily on the bench, as if his strength had abandoned him. So what? Just like that, it's all over. 20 years of marriage mean nothing. Marisol sat down next to him, but kept her distance. They mean a lot, Roberto. They mean we had Paloma, who is the best thing we've ever done in our lives. They mean we had experiences that shaped us. But they also mean 20 years of learning the wrong way to love each other. Wrong. You learned that love was control. I learned that love was disappearing. Neither of us learned that love was growing together, respecting each other, supporting each other to be better people. Roberto was silent for several minutes. Around them, the Tlaquepaque Square was beginning to fill with families out for a walk in the cool afternoon air. Children ran between the benches, young couples held hands, and elderly people played dominoes under the streetlights that were beginning to come on. Do you think you can forgive me someday? He finally asked. Marisol looked at him with calm eyes. I already forgave you, Roberto. Not for you, but for me, because carrying resentment is like carrying a stone in your heart. I don't want to carry stones anymore. So is there hope? There is hope that we can be better parents to Paloma. There is hope that you can visit her when she wants to see you. There is hope that in a few years we can sit down to have coffee and talk about our daughter without hurting each other. But Roberto, there is no hope that we will get back together as a couple. Roberto nodded slowly, as if he finally understood that some things, once broken, cannot be repaired. Are you happy? Marisol asked. She smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Roberto had seen from her in years. I'm learning to be happy. I'm learning that happiness isn't something someone else gives me. It's something I build every day. Roberto stood up slowly. Take good care of Paloma. I always have, and always will. You can tell her that her dad loves her, that even though we no longer live together, she will always be the most important thing in my life. I'll tell her that. But Roberto, you're also going to tell her with your actions, by being the father she deserves. Roberto picked up the roses from the ground and walked slowly away toward his truck. Halfway there, he turned around. Marisol, you were a good wife, better than I deserved. Marisol sat on the bench, watching the man who had been her world for 20 years walk away. She felt no sadness, no joy, only peace. When she got home, Paloma was doing her homework at the kitchen table, while Aunt Rosa prepared red enchiladas. The aroma of home cooking and the sound of soft music on the radio created a homey atmosphere that Marisol had never experienced in her 20 years of marriage. How did it go at the store, Mom? Paloma asked without looking up from her books. Very well, my daughter. And I ran into your dad at the plaza. Paloma looked up with concern. Is he okay? Did he bother you? He didn't bother me. He wanted to talk. He says he loves you very much and hopes to see you soon. And what did you say to him? I told him that when you want to see him, you can see him, but that our decision to live here is final. Paloma nodded and returned to her homework. Okay, maybe next month I can go visit him at the ranch. I miss Grandma Carmen. Aunt Rosa approached Marisol with a cup of chamomile tea. How are you feeling, dear? Marisol took the warm cup in her hands and looked around the small kitchen. The walls were decorated with family photographs, plants she had grown herself, and mementos of the new life she was building day by day. I feel free, Auntie. For the first time in my adult life, I feel completely free. That night, after Paloma fell asleep and Aunt Rosa retired to her room, Marisol went out to the small backyard of the house. The sky was clear, and the stars sparkled like diamonds over Tlaquepaque. She touched her cheek, where there was no longer any mark from Roberto's blow. Her skin had healed completely, but more importantly, her soul was healing too. Tomorrow would be another day of work at the store, another day of building her financial independence, another day of being an example to her daughter that women can be strong and brave. Another day of proving that it is never too late to start over. At 42, Marisol Herrera had learned the most important lesson of her life, that true love begins with loving yourself. And as the stars of Jalisco shone above her head, Marisol smiled, thinking of all the adventures that awaited her in her new life, a life where she would never again have to ask permission to be happy. Marisol found her freedom. Paloma learned that women can be brave, and Roberto had to face the consequences of his actions, because sometimes life teaches us that the end of one story is just the beginning of a much better one.